My father sold me for a bag of cash and a cleared debt. He told me the man I was marrying was just a lonely businessman who needed a wife. But as the gold ring slipped onto my finger, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air. My new husband didn't smile. He didn't even speak. It wasn't until we reached his private estate, a place the police are too afraid to enter, that I saw the tattoos under his sleeve. I didn't just marry a stranger. I married the devil of the East. And tonight, the devil wants what he paid for. The rain in Seoul didn't feel like water, it felt like lead. I stood in a small, dim kitchen, watching my father, Gabriel, stare at a piece of paper. His hands were shaking. He was a simple farmer who had moved to the city to find a better life, but all he found was debt. The men who lent him money weren't bankers. They were monsters. "Linda," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I have no choice. They will kill me. They will burn the farm." I looked at the contract on the table. It was a marriage license. In exchange for my hand, the debt would vanish. I would be married to a man I had never met, a man named Dante Moretti. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was 25, full of dreams, and now I was being sold like a sack of grain. I took the pen and signed my life away. I didn't know then that I wasn't just saving my father. I was walking straight into the jaws of a wolf. If you love stories about strong women, make sure to subscribe for more interesting stories. Dante Moretti was not a man who lived in the light. At 45, he lived as the shadow king of the city. Although he was Korean by birth, his name carried the power of an empire that reached across the world. He lived high above the streets in a penthouse that seemed to touch the clouds, a place made of nothing but cold glass and hard steel. Dante didn't just walk into a room, he moved through it like a predator hunting in the dark. Whenever he stepped through a door, the air around him seemed to turn to ice. He didn't use many words because he didn't have to. A single look from his dark, hooded eyes was enough to make a grown man fall to his knees in fear. He was a man who was deeply used to power. He was used to the way people held their breath when they heard his name. Dante spent his busy days making deals that changed the world, and he spent his lonely nights staring out at the city he owned. He was a man who appeared to have everything a person could ever want, yet his heart was a frozen wasteland. He had not come looking for a wife because he wanted love or a partner to share his life with. Instead, he wanted a wife because he believed a king needed a queen to show off at his side. He bought me just like he would buy an expensive piece of art, something beautiful to keep locked away in a golden cage. I was just a way for him to complete his image of power. To him, I wasn't a person with my own dreams. I was a prize he had paid for to settle a debt. As I stood in his silent, cold home, I realized that my life as Linda Lee was over. I was now part of the Morty world, and in this world, the sun never seemed to rise. On the day of the wedding, there were no bright flowers or happy music to fill the air. There were no friends cheering or family members taking photos. I wore a simple white dress that didn't feel like a wedding gown at all. It felt like a shroud. We didn't stand in a beautiful church with sunlight streaming through the windows. Instead, we stood in a quiet, private office that smelled of old paper and secrets. Dante stood next to me, his presence filling the small room. He smelled like expensive wood and the fresh, sharp scent of cold rain. He was so tall that his broad shoulders seemed to block out the sun from the single window behind him. When the time came for him to put the ring on my finger, he took my hand, and his grip felt like iron. His skin was warm against mine, but his expression remained as hard as a mountain stone. He didn't look like a man who had just found a wife. He looked like a man who had just finished a business deal. "Do not cry," he said. It was the first time I had ever heard his voice. It was a low, deep rumble that moved through the air and made my skin prickle with a strange energy. "You are a Morty now," he continued, his eyes staying fixed on the wall ahead. "Mortys do not show weakness to the world." I looked up at him, my vision blurring with hot tears that I tried to blink away. I wanted him to look at me, to show even a tiny spark of kindness, but he didn't look back. He simply picked up a pen, signed the marriage paper with a quick stroke, and walked out of the room without another word. He left me standing there with two men dressed in identical black suits. These were his guards, Maxwell and Osmond. They didn't smile or offer a kind word. They just pointed toward a large black car waiting at the curb outside. I turned to see my father standing by the door. He was clutching his bag of money and refusing to look me in the eye. He had what he wanted, the cash to pay his debts. I had what I had been traded for, a husband who was a stranger. As the car pulled away from the curb and the office disappeared from view, a heavy weight settled in my chest. I realized then that I was leaving the world of sunlight and simple dreams behind. I was entering a world of shadows, and I had no idea if I would ever find my way back out. Life in Dante's massive mansion was like living inside a beautiful museum. Every vase was in the right place, and every floor shone like a mirror, but everything felt cold to the touch. Dante was rarely home, and when he was, he treated me like a ghost. He ignored my presence, moving past me in the hallways as if I were just another piece of expensive furniture. I spent my long, lonely days wandering through the silent halls, listening to the echo of my own footsteps. One afternoon, I found a door at the end of a dark corridor that was locked. My curiosity finally got the better of me. I felt like I was living with a stranger, and I needed to find a single piece of the puzzle that was Dante Moretti. I searched the kitchen until I found a heavy spare key hidden in a back drawer. With a shaking hand, I turned the lock and stepped inside. The room was different from the rest of the house. It was full of old, framed photos and stacks of dusty books that smelled of the past. In the very center of the room sat a picture of a young Dante standing between a man and a woman. They all looked so happy, their smiles bright and real. But when I looked closer, my breath caught in my throat. The faces of the parents had been violently slashed with a sharp knife, leaving only the young boy's face untouched. I began to look through the shelves and found a small diary that had belonged to his mother. As I flipped through the yellow pages and read her words, my blood ran cold. The world believed Dante's parents had died in a simple accident, but the diary told a much darker story. They had been betrayed by the very people they trusted most. Dante hadn't just lost them, he had watched the entire thing happen when he was just a little boy. In that moment, I understood him. He had spent his whole life building a high wall around his heart so that no one could ever get close enough to hurt him again. He wasn't just born a mean or cold man, he had been forged in the fire of a terrible tragedy. Suddenly, the heavy door creaked behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Dante was standing in the doorway, his large frame blocking out the light. His face was twisted in a look of pure rage that I had never seen before. "Who gave you permission to enter this room?" he growled, his voice vibrating with anger. The tension between us grew like a gathering storm. After he found me in that secret room, Dante began to watch me much more closely. He didn't lock me away, but he started taking me to expensive dinners and loud social events. He forced me to stand by his side and play the part of a happy bride, smiling for people I didn't even know. One evening, as we prepared for a large party, he walked into my dressing room holding a velvet box. Inside was a diamond necklace that sparkled so brightly it made my eyes ache. I knew just by looking at it that it cost more than my father's entire farm and everything we had ever owned. "Wear it," he commanded, his voice as firm as ever. "Tonight, we are going to meet the people who think they can take what belongs to me. I want them to see exactly what I have." I stood still as he stepped behind me. As he clipped the heavy diamonds around my neck, his large fingers lingered on my skin for just a moment. For a split second, his touch wasn't cold or rough. It felt surprisingly soft. I looked at his reflection in the mirror, searching his face. Behind that hard stare, I thought I saw a tiny flicker of something else. Was it sadness? Or perhaps a deep regret for the life he was forced to lead? "Why me, Dante?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "There are 1,000 beautiful women in this city who would jump at the chance to be your wife. Why did you choose a farmer's daughter?" He stepped even closer until I could feel the heat of his chest pressing against my back. He looked at my reflection with a serious expression. "Because you have honest eyes, Linda," he said quietly. "In the world I live in, honesty is much more rare than diamonds. I can't trust anyone, but I can see the truth in you." In that moment, the air in the room changed. For the very first time, I didn't see the monster everyone talked about. I saw a man who was incredibly lonely, even though he lived in a house full of riches. I felt a strange spark of pity for him, but before I could say another word, he pulled away. The soft look vanished, and the cold mask of the Mafia boss slid back into place. "Let's go," he said, checking his watch. "The show is about to start." We arrived at the high-end charity gala, and the room was filled with the smell of expensive perfume and old money. Everyone bowed or stepped aside as Dante walked past, but I could hear the sharp whispers following us like shadows. People weren't looking at me with envy. They were looking at me with pity. To them, I was just another beautiful thing that the devil had collected. Dante was busy talking to a group of investors, so I stepped away to get some air. That was when I saw him. Maxwell, Dante's most trusted guard and the man who was always by his side, was standing in the dark shadows of a hallway. He was talking to a man I didn't recognize, someone who looked like he belonged in a back alley rather than a ballroom. Maxwell looked incredibly nervous, his eyes darting around the room. I watched as he reached into his jacket and handed over a small silver flash drive. The mysterious man tucked it away and disappeared into the crowd. Later that night, when we were finally back at the mansion and the world was quiet, I tried to tell Dante what I had seen. My heart was pounding as I stood in his study. "Dante, I saw Maxwell at the gala," I said softly. "He was meeting someone in secret. He looked like he was hiding something important. I think he gave that man a drive." Dante laughed, but it was a dry, bitter sound that held no joy. "Maxwell has been with me for 20 years, Linda," he said, not even looking up from his desk. "He is more loyal to me than a brother would be. You are just imagining things because you are nervous about your new life." He dismissed me with a wave of his hand as if I were a silly child. I felt a cold knot of dread tighten in my stomach. I knew exactly what I had seen, and it wasn't a mistake. I realized then that Dante's greatest strength, his loyalty to his family, was also his biggest weakness. He trusted the people around him too much because he had known them so long. If Maxwell was actually a traitor, then Dante's entire empire was built on nothing but sinking sand. I went back to my room, but I didn't go to sleep. I decided right then that I would keep watching everything. I wasn't just a wife kept in a cage anymore. I was going to be a protector, whether Dante wanted one or not. The public humiliation happened exactly a week later at a massive business summit. The grand hall was packed with reporters and powerful leaders from all over the country. Dante stood tall on the stage, looking like the king he was, ready to announce a new deal that would unite the entire city's trade. I sat in the very front row, wearing the diamonds he had given me, trying my best to look like the loyal wife he expected. Suddenly, the large screens behind him flickered and changed. Instead of showing his business plans and growth charts, they showed private photos of Dante's secret shipments and detailed bank accounts. The room went deathly silent for a split second before a distorted voice boomed over the speakers. "Dante Moretti is not a businessman. He is a dangerous criminal, and his own wife is the one who provided the evidence to prove it." The room went wild. People jumped to their feet, shouting and pointing. Cameras flashed like lightning as reporters scrambled toward the stage. Dante turned his head slowly to look at me. His eyes were no longer cold or hard. They were full of a betrayal so deep and painful that it broke my heart right there in my chest. I stood up, my hands shaking, frozen in place. I hadn't done anything, but the world was screaming that I was a liar. Then Maxwell stepped out from the curtains and onto the stage. He wasn't acting like a nervous guard anymore. He held up a thick document with my signature clearly marked at the bottom. It was a fake, but in the bright lights of the stage, it looked dangerously real. "She told me she hated you, Dante," Maxwell lied, his voice loud and clear so that everyone could hear. "She told me she only married you to get close enough to bring you down. She wanted revenge for what you did to her father." Dante didn't yell at Maxwell. He didn't try to fight the people around him. He simply walked off the stage, his shoulders slumped for the first time since I had met him. He stopped for a second right in front of me, looking at me as if I were a ghost he no longer recognized. "I should have known," he whispered, his voice so quiet it was almost lost in the noise of the crowd. "Sheep always run back to the flock." He walked past me without another word, leaving me alone in a room full of people who now saw me as a traitor. I watched him go, knowing that the wall he had built around his heart had just become a fortress I might never be able to enter again. As soon as we returned to the mansion, the heavy iron lock on my bedroom door clicked shut. Dante had locked me inside, and I could hear his angry shouts from the hallway as he barked orders to his men. He was preparing to flee the country before the police could arrive at the gates. He truly believed I was the one who had destroyed his life, and my heart felt like it was being squeezed in a cold fist. I knew I had to do something to save him, even if he hated me. I sat on the edge of my bed, my mind racing, until I remembered the dusty room and the diary I had found. There was a name written in the back, a lawyer who had helped Dante's mother many years ago. I realized that if anyone knew the truth about the past, it was him. I managed to push open my window and climb down the trellis, my hands shaking as I reached the wet grass. I ran through the dark woods until I reached a noisy payphone on the main road. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number and begged for help. 2 hours later, after meeting a gray-haired man in a quiet cafe, I finally had the proof in my hands. The truth was even worse than I had imagined. Maxwell hadn't just betrayed Dante today. He was the one who had caused the terrible accident that killed Dante's parents 20 years ago. He had been playing a long, cruel game, pretending to be a loyal brother while waiting for the perfect moment to steal the entire Morty empire for himself. I rushed back to the mansion, but the driveway was already glowing with red and blue lights. The house was surrounded by men with guns and heavy vests. My heart stopped when I saw Dante being led out of the front doors in handcuffs. He looked defeated, his head bowed low. In the background, Maxwell stood near a police car, a smug and satisfied smile on his face. I didn't care about the guards or the weapons. I pushed through the line of men, screaming as loud as I could. "Stop! You have to look at this." I held up the folder of documents I had gathered, my voice cracking with emotion. "Maxwell killed your parents, Dante. He was the one who planned it all. He set you up to take the fall. Just look at the dates on these files." The lead detective paused and took the papers from my hand. As he began to read, Maxwell's smug smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure terror. He turned to run toward the shadows, but Osmond, the other guard, was faster. He tackled Maxwell to the ground with a loud thud, pinning the traitor to the pavement. The truth hit the driveway like a bomb, scattering the lies Maxwell had spent years building. The lead detective signaled his men, and the cold metal handcuffs were quickly clicked off Dante's wrists. The police moved as one toward Maxwell, who was still struggling on the pavement. Dante stood perfectly still, looking stunned as the weight of the world shifted around him. He looked down at the old papers in the detective's hand, then at the man he had once trusted, and finally, his dark eyes landed on me. He looked at me as if he were seeing me for the very first time. He realized that the woman he had bought to settle a debt, the stranger he had treated like a prize in a cage, was the only person in the entire world who had stepped up to save him. I stood there, shivering in the cold night air, my hair messy and my dress torn from the escape, but I didn't look away. Dante walked slowly over to where Maxwell was pinned to the floor by the officers. 20 years, Dante whispered. His voice was trembling with a rage that was quiet but absolutely terrifying to behold. "For 20 years, I called you my brother. I gave you my trust and my life." He didn't raise his hand to strike the traitor. He didn't have to. He just looked at the police with eyes that were cold once again. "Take him away," he commanded. "I want him to rot in a dark cell where he can never see the sun again. Let him remember what he stole from me every single day." As the sirens faded into the distance and the mansion became silent and empty, Dante turned toward me. In the dim light of the porch, he looked older and more tired than I had ever seen him. The devil everyone feared suddenly looked very human. He walked toward me with slow, heavy steps. I braced myself, expecting him to offer a stiff thank you or a nod of his head. Instead, the powerful man who owned the city fell to his knees right in front of me. He reached out and buried his face in my hands. He didn't say a single word, but I felt my palms grow wet with his hot, heavy tears. The iron wall he had built around his heart for 20 years had finally crumbled to dust. I stood there in the silence, holding the man who had once been my captor, as he finally let go of the pain that had been eating him alive since he was a boy. 6 months passed, and the world felt completely different. The dark clouds that had hung over the Morty name were finally gone, cleared by the truth we had uncovered together. Dante had changed in ways that surprised everyone in the city. He still ran his vast empire with a steady hand, but the cold cruelty was gone, replaced by a sense of fairness that made people respect him rather than just fear him. He had even used his wealth to rebuild my father's old farm, turning it into a beautiful, sprawling estate where Gabriel could finally live in peace and comfort. I stood in the sun-drenched garden of the mansion, the smell of blooming flowers filling the air. I was no longer a ghost wandering through cold halls. I was a woman who had found her voice. As I brushed bright red paint onto a canvas, capturing the beauty of the roses, I felt a pair of strong, familiar arms wrap around my waist. I didn't jump or pull away. Instead, I leaned back into his broad chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart against my shoulder. "The art gallery called this morning," Dante said, his voice low and warm against my ear. "They want to show your new paintings to the world. They are already calling you the angel of the Mortys for the way you changed this house." I turned around in his arms, resting my paint-stained hands on his shoulders, and smiled up at him. "The world has many names for me now, Dante." "But what do you call me?" He looked down at me, his dark eyes no longer like obsidian, but full of light and a life I never thought I would see. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a new ring, not the heavy, cold gold one from our first wedding, but a beautiful sapphire that sparkled like the clear afternoon sky. "I call you my life," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I bought a wife to pay a debt, but I ended up with a soul I know I don't deserve. I am never letting you go, Linda, not because of a signed contract or a debt, but because I love you with everything I am." I stood on my tiptoes and kissed him, and for the first time in a very long time, there was no rain and no shadows. There was only the warmth of the sun and a bright future that belonged to both of us. If you loved this story of betrayal, revenge, and a love that changed the devil himself, don't let the journey end here. Click the subscribe button for more cinematic stories.